make the best use of our time today. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Melissa Devlin. I am the Assistant Director at the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network here at Generations United. And if you're not familiar with our organization, we are the first ever National Technical Assistance Center on Grand Families and Kinship Families. I'm going to put our website address in the chat. If you're not familiar with us or using our resources, please take a look. We have about 100 resources that are newly created, focusing specifically on how to better serve grand families and kinship families. And one of the ways that we're providing support and technical assistance is through these learning communities or collaboratives. And the one that we are in today is Kinship Mobilization. And we are part of a larger series. If you got this invitation forwarded to you, please send me a note in the chat with your email address, and I'll make sure that you get signed up for all future sessions. Today, we're going to be talking about how LA County is having a tremendous success in kin placements in the county. And I've heard that there's an excess of 90% placement rate with kin, which is just incredibly amazing. So we are thrilled to be able to have individuals who are making this happen in the county with us today, and letting us know how that works and some ideas around how the rest of us can have greater success in this work. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kevin Campbell, who's going to be moderating our panel today. And we want this to be a engaging conversation. So please put questions in the chat. If you have experiences with this as well, please let us know what you're doing, and we'll make sure that we get some time to answer your questions. And also, yes, please let us know in the chat your name and where you come from, and what your role is in this work. So now I'm going to turn this over to Kevin Campbell. Kevin, many of you know, I'm sure, is the developer of the family finding and family scene models. He is the co-founder and CEO of, I want to make sure I get this right, Pale Blue. And we're really happy to have him here today and to have our panel. So Kevin, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I apologize for folks. I have a cold, and so I probably sound a little less loud. But I'm thrilled to be with you, and I'm really proud to be with Judge Nash and with Adrian Olson. To set the context, I met Judge Nash and Adrian about 20 years ago, in fact, when I had developed a practice here in Washington State that had become legislated, which was a process of searching for and providing notice to relatives of children who were removed from their parents. And the first opportunity I had to replication testing of the practices here in Washington were in California, where I'm originally from. And I'm from LA County originally, from uh, uh, up in Santa Clarita. And so what is really interesting to share with you today, now I hope they could share with you, is kind of a very deep and broad perspective about a journey of implementation over 20 years. Particularly, we want to focus, I think it will be on the last 8 years or so, with efforts that were led by Judge Nash through the Office of Child Protection in the county around what they had called upfront family finding. So from the very beginning, as I recall talking to Judge years ago, we were originally the strategy 20 years ago was we focused on the longest waiting young people in the out-of-home care system. My thinking at the time had been that if we could show that for the longest waiting, most complex needs young people in the care system, that who were said not to have a family, that family members would come forward and others come forward and claim a relationship with them. The question that it would raise would be, if that's true, well, how would their lives have been different had we done this at the very beginning? And Judge Nash was very quick to see that connection. And the upfront family finding design in Los Angeles County, I think, became the opportunity that was created in the county to really take advantage of that. I will say to you guys, just because we've heard recently from the wonderful folks at Wendy's Wonderful Kids, um, when they've been sharing recently, as you're familiar, their adoption outcomes with older young people, that 75% of the adoptions that have been accomplished by Wendy's Wonderful Kids have been accomplished by relatives. 700 of those by parents who had their rights restored and were able to take custody of their older young person. So we really saw that for the long waiting young people, this could be beneficial. But what we have seen in Los Angeles is moving that vision right to the first knock at the door, right at first contact with families has produced astonishing impacts. And that's what I'm hoping to have our guests share with you today. And I wanted to start with you, Judge Nash, and I wanted to ask you um, to, I think, as you know, my interest in whenever I've had a chance to talk to you is to particularly emphasize the role of leadership in making this kind of transformation. What I will say, I've been involved, and my colleague Elizabeth, who's with us, has been involved in numerous research projects around family engagement and child welfare across the United States, but also elsewhere in the world. And one of the common challenges that we have is we can demonstrate through distinct projects that this capability that families and community members have to respond urgently to children who encounter child protection. But being able to demonstrate that willingness on their part is not the same thing as changing the organization in ways that would welcome them. We use language from Isabella Wilkerson's book, Invited but Unwelcome, that often the experience relatives have had with the implementation of searching and notification requirements in child welfare interventions is that we can locate them and they will be provided notices, but they're often not welcome in the process in everyday practice. And what I have said about Los Angeles County, and I'll stop there and then we'll go to the judge, is they seem to have found a solution to the invited but unwelcome problem. And we're going to hear about that today. But I want to start with you, Judge, and start maybe talking about the leadership, the importance of leadership in making that change, not just our ability to know their relatives and to find them, but to actually create an environment where they're welcomed and where they have a fair chance to be at the table involved in the lives of children from their families. So,
All right, Kevin, thanks. Let me just set the stage a little
yeah,
bit here.
yeah,
Um, when I started in child welfare with the juvenile court, it was back in 1990. Here in LA, we had about 60,000 kids in our system. I remind you, LA is a big place. Our population today is, over 10 million people in LA County. For DCFS, we have 19 DCFS offices scattered around the county. So each office really is this, has a population the size of a small city, or actually not a small city, actually a fairly good sized city. We also have a juvenile court with over 30 dependency courts, which has grown significantly since I retired from the court in 2015. So those are very positive things. But well, as I said, when I started, we had 60,000 kids. When I became presiding judge back in 1997, we had about 53,000 kids. And as I look at the system today, it's almost like a dream come true. Uh, our population is 21,000 and change, and it's going to go down even further. I mean, I had a dream years ago that if we ever got to 20,000 or less, we'd be in really good shape here in LA, and we're going to get there.
yeah,
So that, but that just increases the pressure on the system as a whole to do better. when you have
Right.
those reduced caseloads. So we'll see what happens over the long term. Now, as you said, we started talking about family finding back in 2003 thereabouts,
Yep.
and that focusing on the back end of the system, for those kids in danger of aging out, proved to be very successful for a large number of kids. And for years, I advocated when I was with the court, come on, let's bring this to the front end of the system. It will cure so many problems that we have when we can place kids with relatives. And somewhere around 2007, 2008, I convinced our director at that time to actually do a little bit of an experiment, bringing it to the front end. And it was a small pilot, okay, but it was successful in that more kids were placed with relatives. And at least in that small pilot, it showed that more kids were actually going home quicker, okay? I mean, as a small pilot, but you know what? It stalled after that. And which frustrated me and, got me in trouble with uh, you know, subsequent directors, as I tended to criticize them for not focusing more on this particular issue. Now, in 2016, after I retired from the bench, um, and I retired unsuccessfully because I wound up, in this new job as director of the Office of Child Protection. Um, you know, at that time, everybody was wringing their hands, going, "Oh my God, we don't have enough foster parents in our system. We have to do a better job of, recruiting and retaining foster parents." I said, "No, no, no. I mean, that's not the approach. The best approach, of course, is to do everything possible to keep kids at home. But if you can't do that, then we need to place them with relatives. Okay, that's the solution. Okay, and if we can do that, increase those numbers with relatives, then we still need to recruit and retain foster parents, but certainly we can be a lot more selective, about doing that. Okay, so fortunately, several months into my job here, after lobbying on this, the Board of Supervisors said to DCFS, let's you work together with my office and come up with an approach to increase the number of relative placements, increase relative engagement, make greater use of family finding technology. And that's exactly what we've done. And we started with 2 of the 19 offices back in 2016. And really, the message to the social workers and to the leadership in each office was this: look, we know that it's in the best interest of kids in so many different ways. Okay, I won't go over the list here, okay, of ways that it's, in their interest to be with family. Okay. But also from a social work perspective, I would say to the social workers, look, what's the biggest criticism that we have in child welfare? We're breaking up families. Okay. And now let's look at the numbers. If you look around the United States at that time, with all the kids that are removed from their families, uh, the average number of placements with relatives was like 30%. Well, that certainly ties into that notion, that you're breaking up families. What if we can shift that ratio in the other direction? And then we can say we truly are a family preserving entity. Okay. And that's how you're going to get respect, by being an entity that keeps families together, puts families back together, and doesn't break up families. And, the social workers in each office bought into that. Okay. And it took us several years to get to the point where it's now a countywide program. I can go into some of the data, at some point if you want. But the bottom line is, this isn't rocket science. Okay, it's just getting the social work, the child welfare community to buy into this idea that it's important that we focus on families, okay? Keeping families together, bringing other families into the process, engaging them in the process, and doing that as quickly as possible. And that's exactly what we've done. And I think the program has been very successful, and it's been successful in a number of ways. Number one, the social workers themselves. Number two, the leaders in their office, have been very supportive of this. So there has been really no pushback, on this. Everybody kind of went into this, with great willingness, and it's worked. The other thing, that we have continued to push, and it's still an issue, is let's do a better job of not only finding relatives, but engaging them. Okay, beyond just placement issues. What can relatives bring to the table to support the family? And so that's another big piece. And then the third piece, of course, is DCFS leadership, which bought into this and said, look, we have to ensure that relatives have the support that they need. Okay, because what I found in my experience over the years, when kids were placed with relatives, you have a tendency to go, oh, good, kids with placed with relatives, we can relax. But it's the relatives who really need the help. They need it a lot more than actually foster parents, because foster parents, they have to go through training, they have to get licensed. Relatives are basically, you know, woken up in the middle of the night and said, "Can you take care of this kid? Okay, bring this kid into your home," and they don't know how to navigate the system, so they actually need the help. And that's one thing that DCFS has focused on, in terms of providing support to them, in particular financial support. DCFS in LA, the first thing they did was actually provide a stipend to foster parents or to relatives, when they were given custody of the kids, because they weren't at that point entitled to the full foster care rate. Okay, and so that was the first thing they did to help. That wasn't enough, and our DCFS leadership, went to the state legislature and basically got the legislature to change the whole funding scheme so that foster parent relatives are getting the full foster care rate that any foster parent gets once they take the child into their custody, and apply to become a caregiver for the child. So DCFS, at all different levels has worked, to make this particular process work, and I do think it's been a great success. And I will just, I keep track of the statistics, okay, and I publish them every quarter. So I just got the numbers yesterday. I haven't the latest quarter numbers. I haven't put them together yet, but I can tell you for the first quarter of 2024, there were probably 1,500 or so kids who were the subject of detention hearings here in LA County, and the overall family placement rate, if you will, was 80. Let's see. No, excuse me. Was for the first quarter was 83% of the kids were placed with family. Okay, we tend to call that kin care. And when I say placed with family, what I'm talking about are really three things. I'm talking about non-offending parents. I'm talking about your traditional notion of relatives and non-related extended family members. Now, typically, when jurisdictions, look at the relative placement rate, they don't consider the non-offending parents. So if we take the non-offending parents out of the equation, the relative placement rate was 61%, which is still, an excellent number. And look, LA has always been pretty good. We've always been in the 40 to 50% range. But we were really stuck on that for many years until, we really began to focus on that through this process. Now, the other thing that the department does is when a child is placed in foster care as opposed to with a relative, then there's a special unit that called P3 that then, gets on the case for the next 90 days or so to do some real family finding and reaching out to relatives and so forth. And we found through that process, that almost half of those kids ended up at some point, with family, whether it's their parents or other relatives, so that means you're really talking, 80 to 90%, of the kids, within the first 90 days of coming into the system, uh, end up at some point with family. And that's really the important thing here. And um, I think the department in Los Angeles, is entitled to some great credit for the work that they've done here. Okay. As I say, I've just been a cheerleader in all this, or sometimes I criticize them when they're not, up to snuff. But for the most part, this has been a wildly successful effort on the part of DCFS.
Yeah. Thank you, Judge. I just want to mention, as Judge mentioned, there are 19 offices, and they've done a phased-in implementation of these offices. So the averages that the judge has shared with you are are a total average. What we've seen is the offices who have been in the pilot longer have better numbers. And so what we've seen, I think one of the things I mentioned replication in my remarks earlier. One of the things I've been impressed by what's happened in the county is their ability to replicate an implementation of this across offices over time. So they've learned how to stand up this practice in an office over time. And there are differences between offices. They face different challenges depending on where they're located geographically. So I want to acknowledge that sometimes a challenge, it'll be uniquely challenging in a particular office to do something because they may have particular challenges. The Metro North office, for example, includes an area called Skid Row and has a really substantial hardships in the neighborhoods that it serves, and it makes it particularly challenging. So I want to acknowledge really high outcomes. They've demonstrated they can replicate the outcomes, and also that offices do face unique challenges in their implementations depending on what's going on geographically and economically in the serving area that they're located in. So if I recall, Judge, is it four offices that in the first quarter this year that achieved over 90% in the first data?
Looking at, let's see, uh, there were one, two, three, one, two, no, there were five offices that had an over 90%
Yeah,
kin care rate,
yeah,
with, you know, gosh, most of the offices over 80%.
that's
And
right.
there's a few, that were under that, but it's, still pretty impressive overall.
Very impressive. And again, it's a phased implementation, so we'll see some changes. We assume we'll see changes over time for example, I think four of the offices are within about a year of starting. So we'll see. I suspect we'll see what we've seen before, which is that they will get stronger as they move forward.
Well, once again, by
Yeah,
publishing the data every quarter, office
yeah,
by office, I think that does help. And some
yeah,
offices, they do compete with each other as well. They look at
yeah,
what the other offices are doing, and it does help. Plus, if you have an office that is not doing as well as the other offices, and everybody can kind of pitch in and say, okay, let's try and figure out, what was done there. When we originally started this program, for the first few years, I'd go from office to office. And what we would do each month is that we would look at the cases, and in particular, look at the cases where children were not, were placed in foster care as opposed to being placed with kin. And we say, okay, let's see, what are the issues here? And what can we do, moving forward to resolve some of those issues? And it was very helpful.
yeah.
We have a couple of questions if
Sure.
we're ready to take those now for
Sure.
Judge. Alrighty. When they get the stipend, do relatives need to be ultimately a foster parent home and licensed? So these are licensed foster parents that have to, I'm sorry, licensed kinship foster parents that receive the stipend, correct?
Well, right now, they receive the foster care rate when they're placed with, when the child is placed with them and they apply actually for formal licensing status.
So they
So
have to be licensed.
eventually, okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, but before they had to wait until that the licensing came through, and that took ridiculously long, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that was hurting families. So, through great advocacy from our departmental leadership, that was changed.
Okay, great. And then the next question is for emergency placements, what's the turnaround time between the relative taking in the child and receiving their first kinship stipend or
Immediate,
SIL?
immediate. We're
Immediate.
talking about the first placement upon removal. Those numbers that I gave you, the 80% plus, that's the first placement. That's the goal for the very first placement upon removal to be with kin.
Okay,
And that
great. Thank you.
creates an effort on the part of the workers to, to find them and make that. And it's incredible that they've done as well as they have, to be honest with you.
It really is. Okay, next is, were any of these kinship placements able to avoid the formal entry into foster care, or all these children who were legally sheltered in foster care and residing with the family?
Yeah, this process applies when basically at as soon as the department comes in and has to remove a child. So we're
Yeah.
talking, uh, whether or not they ultimately get, reach the full disposition stage, depends on, as a case by case basis. But but basically we're talking about kids, where a decision is made that they have to be removed from their parents.
Okay, great. Thank
Every
you. And then,
and excuse me, and every one of these kids, is the becomes the subject of an initial hearing in our system.
okay. And then can you please elaborate more on the unit assigned specifically to find family over the 90-day time frame?
Yeah, it's called P3, Permanency Partners Program, and it began, around 2003,
Yeah.
when this unit was created. And at that time, and for many years, mostly of retired social workers that they brought in to do this. But the when we originally started this process in 2003 for kids at the back end of the system, it was called the Cold Case Project. Okay, let's look at these kids, that are in danger of aging out. And so what these folks do, the P3 folks, is they number one, they become familiar with the technology that's used for family finding. They use the technology, and when they can find relatives, they'll reach out to them and once again determine to what extent that they're interested in the case. Now, they have, when we started this project in 2016, the idea was that they'd be on the case for 90 days. And since then, I think the department, through funding it has received, is now doing beginning to do what I always hoped that they would do, is that they would assign, a P3 worker on every single case,
Yeah.
whether or not a child is placed with a relative or not. Because we still, even if a child is placed with a relative, you want to find as many relatives as possible and say, what can you do for the family besides placement? Can
Yeah.
you do, can you, give respite care, transportation, visitation monitoring, money, food, whatever the case may be? I think that's such an important part of the system, is bringing families together and empowering them to work together to resolve the problems that brought the family into the system in the first place. And, that's a piece that still requires a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me throw out the last question we have, if you don't mind. What solutions were found for the barriers for the offices who were struggling to find kin, like using different databases, approaches with interviewing, etc.?
That's an open question. Okay, because once again, there are a few offices that are not, kind of pretty far behind the other. And I talked to the leadership, and they're looking into it. I don't know exactly, they don't think they've come up completely with a game plan yet, how to bring those other offices up, other than, once again, working with the leadership, making sure that their leadership in each office is on the same page as the rest of the department in supporting this, because I think that is just so important. And then obviously it's important it would be important, to once again for each office to get together, and look at those cases, where children are placed in foster care and say, is there a way that they could have been placed with family, or is it just inevitable under those particular circumstances? So that's still a work in progress as well.
Yeah. I'll just say broadly, we haven't seen um, a lot of evidence that particular database search tools or other things make much of a difference. They're pretty even. They pretty much draw their data from similar sources. I think what Judge is talking about is it really is about practice. It's really I think we'll hear about that here in a minute with Adrian. I think you're going to hear there's a couple of hidden kind of unseen but powerful contributors to success that are less talked about. Judge just mentioned one of them in LA County, the investment that the board has made and the agency has made in these P3 workers. And they've made a significant staffing investment to make this successful. And so we find, you can find 300 relatives, but if you have no time to work with them, it won't do you much good. You've got to have enough personnel who are trained and have strong practice to work successfully with these families that are found. That's part of that, what I called the invited but unwelcome experiences. If you're bringing lots of relatives into contact with the department that doesn't have the time or skills to work successfully with you, that may create as much of a problem as it creates a solution. But what LA, I think, did really, really importantly here was make they saw the success of the early P3 project they did, and they saw how it could be leveraged into a greater success by moving it to the front end of the system. So, but I'll bring Adrian Olson in. Adrian is what the administrator for one of the 19 offices in the county. So we thought you'd appreciate hearing from someone, right in the trenches there. And I asked Adrian, you heard some hints here about outcomes. Again, over initially about 80%, over an average of 80% of kids are in kinship care within 90 days. Somewhere close to 90% are in kinship care. And that certainly points to a particular outcome. But of course, we know that there are well-being outcomes that are important to consider also. And so I had asked Adrian to think um, about what she might have to say about how she sees the outcomes that are experienced by children and young people, how she sees outcomes for parents. Remember that Judge mentioned non-offending parents. Well, these are largely what he's talking about are probably dads who in the past have been left out. And then also to talk about relatives and their experiences. They're critical in this story. They're critical partners in LA County to run not a foster care system, but a kinship system. And then finally, the group we don't talk enough about in their well-being is the workforce. What's happening with the workforce? How are they experiencing this change? And so I'm going to ask Adrian to share some things about that, if you would.
Oh, sure. Hi. Hi everyone. Great to be here. Um, so I think, yeah, it's so interesting listening to Judge Nash and definitely like agree with like everything he said. I think some of the points I would highlight are really that it's not about this is first and foremost, not about family finding and placement and placing with relatives. I think what it needs to be, what we've really focused on. I mean, we've just reformed our whole entire system. I mean, there's just so many factors, but I think it's, the values and that we provide family-centered services up front, like from the first knock on the door. And it's about, and he did mention about, placing quote unquote with parents first and foremost. So it really is about preserving the families and everything we can do even to prevent them coming into the system. I think there was a question about or any of these like they didn't come in. And so there's huge numbers that I mean, I think it even starts before that, honestly, at the hotline, the way that we're, what referrals are we even accepting in the first place? What do we even consider to be appropriate to as a referral to even contact a family about? And they're really doing great job at the front end and providing resources to families, alternative response services. So I think it's just as far as forward as we can get. We also have something happening in the county called the Mandating Supporting Initiative, which is going, about mandated reporters and what are they doing to, instead of just, oh, we need to call the hotline, what are they doing to support the family and prevent child abuse and neglect, and a report to our agency. So I really think it's just about community partnership. It's about prevention. It's about working with families in a way that where they are, engaged successfully, and going back to, invited, and, feeling not only being contacted, invited, but being welcomed and feeling they have voice and choice and are going to be, that are empowered. So that I think is just fundamental and what we've done. I mean, in terms of like, so that's parents. And in particular, yeah, I think we've really seen how we have been very biased against fathers in particular. And so we have really worked on that concept about how we treat fathers, how we engage them. I mean, because again, sometimes, we'll reach, if we do, well, we have to identify fathers. And so those take certain efforts because, sometimes people will say, oh, I don't know. I don't know where he is, or we don't know who he is, or those kinds of things, when that's not necessarily true. So it's really doing diligence in terms of identifying, and then contacting, you know, family, parents, non-offending parents, extended family, but then our engagement of them, right? And the way that we work with them. And it's also not always about, oh, you know, will you take this child? It's like you're not going to just reach out and say that first and foremost. Again, it's about bringing everyone together, we've done a lot around practice. We have a practice model. We have child and family teams. Every single child who has an open case must have a child and family team. And then, of course, we're working on the quality of that and how we manage that, and really having it be where the family is in charge and making decisions. And so I think that's a little bit touching on the experience, I think, of Kevin, but you could follow up after if there was something more specific you want me to hit. But it's going to the workforce. I think we really do need to recognize that first and foremost is, who's doing the work and who's engaging and who's, who's finding, and they need to be not only trained, but really we need to treat our staff in the way that we want them to treat others. So the parallel process, the work environment, the conditions, creating the conditions for them to be able to do this work. And so we have significantly, again, this is a large part due to our board, our director, and executive team in terms of managing our system. And we've had significant reductions in our caseload. And so our caseload is way down, and so it's, first of all, it's more manageable this work it takes time. But it's really about, like, to be able to have, it's really, again, about connections. And as we all know, like, relationships, they take time, right? So we're making it more doable in that way. Also, is just we now have coaching. We used to have training. Now we have coaching. We have a whole coaching certification process. So again, like, helping them, provide them with the skills, the tools, using our, the protective factors framework, organized safety organized practice, now motivational interviewing, giving folks like clear, giving them ways of what is safety, what is that really, what's most important there, having something called worry statements that we're using instead of, where we would just get these, oh, the child's at risk, so of course we do SDM, which is, safety versus risk, but now taking it even to a further level in terms of really clearly identifying what are we worried about, and what is then the individualized unique intervention that's going to mitigate that specific worry, and not just be having all these what we call complicating factors, right? That we need to kind of get down to the what is it really that we want to see change, what needs to change, and then engaging again, like I said, the family from the get-go, the parents, in a way that they're, we're not in this place of, where they're not able to be honest, I mean, because that's just, this false, where we're supposedly ensuring safety, but if we're working with people where they can't even be honest, it's kind of a big farce, right? So it's just the way that we treat our staff, the way that we support them, provide them with the necessary tools. Oh, I'll also mention what I think has been a huge reform and very important to our success is our risk management division, and the way that we used to treat staff that where there was a child that was injured or killed, and how it was just, there was so much fear. And so that whole fear-based decision making was driving a lot of the decisions. And so now it's a much different approach and response. And it's of course, we're still looking into what happened, where are there lessons learned, was there, I mean, of course, we care about people that are completely negligent, but that's not the first, assumption. And just where we are, that used to be, I mean, maybe folks know about our Gabriel story and having 4 social workers be criminally prosecuted. I mean, that will freeze your whole, like that doesn't matter what you put in place at that point, like with staff feeling so scared. And so I think all of those things, reducing the caseload, creating a learning organization, providing quality training and coaching. Also, of course, our resources, our partners are in terms of doing strength needs-based practice, having, intensive home-based services, the right intervention at the right time, and also moving that up as far as we can in terms of prevention, and really doing whatever we can in the community to create the environment so that that you don't need to call DCFS, in the first place. Or if you do, there's not just, one response, so I think those are a few of the things I would say.
Yeah. One detail I want to ask you, I think you mentioned you've created a certification process for staff around facilitation. So there's multiple levels of facilitation. I assume that your staff who complete levels of certifications also benefit professionally from that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that it is.
Yeah,
It's really like, what does it mean to be like a professional child welfare worker and a
yeah,
like these terms is like a practitioner.
that's
And
right. I really wanted to
mhm.
point that out. I think one of the things they did that was really smart was they're really making an investment in individual workers becoming highly valued practitioners in the community by investing in processes that they can complete, become certified in, become recognized by the organization for their skill in that area, and to grow professionally in their personal development. And that's going back now at least 5 or 6 years, right? Um, I just think that was kind of one of those unseen things. But if you're going to work with families, if you're going to bring people together into child and family team meetings, you need to prepare the staff to have the skills and the comfort and confidence to be in those meetings and to lead those meetings successfully. And I think, from my perspective, I think that was a critical um, component that you've added at the county that I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's definitely,
Yeah,
definitely agree with that.
yeah,
Did,
Judge.
Yeah, there are a couple of points that I'd like to make
Yeah,
here. I think that are significant. Number one, talking about reaching out to paternal relatives and so forth. Um, a couple of years ago, I asked our P3 folks for some data about how they were doing in finding relatives, and they did a breakdown between maternal and paternal relatives. And at the time, this was 3 or 4 years ago, they had located in total, close to 50,000, relatives in all the cases. And it was almost a 50-50 split
yeah,
between maternal and paternal relatives. And
yeah,
I think that was really significant. Okay. Um, the other thing I'd like to point out to folks here is that we actually hired Child Trends to come in and do two evaluations of the program. One when it was in the first two offices, and secondly, after it got spread to a few more offices. And I won't go into all the details. The evaluations, of course, were very positive. But the key point that I think that the evaluations that Child Trends made was it's clear that in these offices that are participating in the project, there clearly is a change of culture
yeah,
towards this kin first culture. And that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here. And also, not that long ago, the department asked Casey Family Programs to come in and take a look, at how LA's doing in its kin first culture. And there's some really great data in the report that they issued, and there's three things that really stand out to me. Number one, when kids are placed with relatives, there's a significant increase in the number of kids, sibling groups that are placed together.
yeah,
Okay. So, I mean, I think, there's nothing more important than those relationships. And it's always been a challenge, in every system, to place siblings together. So that was a great number. Secondly, the placement stability was significantly better in those kids placed with kin. And of course, Child Trends, pointed that out. But in Casey, they were showing that I mean, it's night and day in terms of placement stability. And quite often, when children who are placed with kin are moved, they're moved to other kin. And
yeah,
I think that's a significant point. And the last thing is, according, in the report that Casey came out with, the exits to permanency were highest amongst relative placements. And once again, way, way higher when you talk about congregate care, significantly higher when you just talk about regular foster care placements. And then we have these things called FFAs, family foster family agencies, that really are designed, in my opinion, for families that are offering permanent homes. And so their rates are permanency is slightly higher than just regular foster care placements, but the relative placements were higher than even them. So all in all, this is, there's nothing negative that you can say about this, in my opinion.
yeah. But I do want to sort of bring up a few points together. I think, um, the, and again, you've been at this a long time, so there's been a lot of learning. And I think one of the interpretations of this is that the um, the relative placement rates are somehow related to search tools and search techniques. And that's not the case. They're related to the skill sets and the leadership in the organization itself. That's that's the big lesson here. The investments in the agency staff have become investments in families, and made these kinds of outcomes possible. And also, Adrian, I don't want to put you on the spot. But I just one concern we've been reading about and hearing about, particularly since the pandemic, is has been workforce concerns, including in other parts of California. There have been real workforce concerns in agencies. But my impression with the few offices I've been engaged with in the county is people are pretty satisfied. They're feeling good about their practice. Would you say anything? I know you lead an office. What would you say about your staff, and how are they feeling about their work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done, it's like I said, it's really been it really, well, I would say it is my top priority is our support, are again, the creating the conditions for the staff to
Yeah,
feel like capable, rewarded,
yeah,
supported, to remove, I mean, of course, there's a lot of stuff about this work I have no choice about. But, the way that I work with them, again, like the way that I work with my management team to work with them to just make all levels in the office. I mean, I have an office of about 400 staff, so, and then we have our different sections, and we have our front end, and we have our ongoing continuing services, and we have dependency investigators, and we have the P3 staff, and we have adoptions. And how do they all work together to support one another? And my office, I will proudly say, because I mean, at least what they tell me, and of course, unless they're just telling me to make me happy, which it does, though, is, my office is known as one of the best offices for them in
that's
terms
good.
of like them feeling, it's just so important, as we say, like your supervisor makes or breaks the job. I mean, that goes for anybody, right? Any job, so it really is recognizing that you've got it the way that, this is, if we can't have a healthy, happy, like, just like a effective, efficient environment, can we have that can we to be talking to children and families about their environment, so we do see it as like one big family, right? And all in the parallel process, and again, the way I treat them is the way that it is hopefully in line with the way they're going to treat children and families. So
Yeah.
I would say that, yeah, I do think it's definitely about professional development too. And again, like giving them like that time and that training and that, but I think it is about, it's about relationships. It's about connections. Just like, that is, as we say, like the biggest protective factor we have, right? And again, children and families, same thing for us. So I think that we try to, have it make sense in terms of what we're asking people to do, and not be doing something that is, opposite of basically the way of what they're seeing in our day-to-day interactions.
My experience in going from office to office was, look, social workers, as you know, they don't get the respect that they deserve, in my opinion. I mean, everybody's, always, dumping on social workers. It's a tough job. Okay. I mean, look, as a judge, I was one of the first to be critical of a lot of the work of social workers. But, through this project, it's all been positive. I
Yeah.
mean, I'd go from office to office, and, and they're doing good stuff here. And they know it, and they're getting patted on the back for it. And that just generates more and more enthusiasm for this. So this has been positive in so many different ways. As I said, positive for kids, positive for their families, and certainly positive for those involved in the workforce that are doing this great work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a, again, I thought it was really important to acknowledge the workforce component here. Quite frankly, I don't think you're hearing anything here that is magical. I think it makes sense. But it's so important. The some folks, there are a couple people that were celebrating something I said about it not being about search tools. I could be a little more direct. We found this out pretty early when we started telling grandmothers that we found them. They told us they weren't hiding. They said they weren't hiding. They said we simply hadn't called them. People aren't hiding. And they're really right there. I will tell you, we've looked at this practice across this nation and across other nations, and from a what we would call a benchmarking perspective, and certainly Los Angeles County has contributed to this thinking. I would think you should expect with strong investments in your staff and in their practice and in their well-being and with strong leadership that you're leading a kin first system, no longer a foster care system, your your kin rate should be at 80 to 85%. I think that's a healthy, achievable rate. It isn't as high as it might be. I think you had one office in the first quarter that was 100%, I believe, if I heard from that office director recently. But I would think a healthy benchmarking rate is about 85%. And that is not about hunting people. It's about how we work with people. That's the lesson, I think. Um, let's see. It says Kevin is the reason this learning collaboration is not called kin finding collaborative, but rather kin mobilization because kin are often right there. Yeah, yeah, they're right there. I've said this. This is my weirdness, but I said at a federal meeting recently, said God created kinship care, politics created foster care. And what I meant by that was that kinship care is a fundamental institution in this nation. It's always been the people we've turned to when children needed someone to look after them when their parent couldn't do it. And we should invest and honor that institution and be proud of it. And I think that's exactly what LA County has done. They're really demonstrating this fundamental truth. And by the way, they still need foster parents in LA County, and they still use them, and they're really valued partners also. But I think what it's allowing LA County to do is be a little more particular about the quality of that foster care experience and the investments in those relationships also. So anyway, thank you. I'll hand it back to you, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. We just had a couple of real quick questions. I think this was addressed earlier. I think someone was looking for, what strategies have been most successful in seeking family members besides asking the parents. And I think you touched on some of that. I don't know if there was anything to add to that.
Well,
Um,
certainly talk to young people. Um, Young people have a particular story to tell about the relationships that they have found important in their lives. Sometimes young people and sometimes parents will be feeling really unhappy about what's happened, and if you'll ask them, about who might, um, do a particular thing for you, their working belief system might be that there's nobody, and they might start off by saying there's nobody. What we've learned is two things can be true. A person can feel like nobody cares about me, and at the same time, there can also be people that care about them. Both things can be true at the same time. So don't give up in those conversations with parents and young people when you're exploring their perspective about who would be in their network and who could come to the table. And I think Adrian made this point, and the judge as well. The initial reaching out to relatives is about coming to the table and helping. It isn't about shopping for a placement. Um, we want to bring people to the table out of their love and concern for their families' distress, and it can, and as you've seen, it more often than not also leads to children uh, being safely placed with their relatives. So,
Yeah, I would just add a couple of ideas about that. Like one of the strategies that we've used is for for young people, children is, to say who are the, can I see your phone, or can you tell me who are the last who did you call, or who called you? Because sometimes, I mean, it will be that, moms maybe for whatever reasons they'll say, yeah, I don't know, the dad's not involved, and then you talk to the kid and it's like, oh, well, you just called me yesterday. So there is sometimes some of that going on, and I think you can, and or it may not be the dad, but it could be again others that they're not thinking of, for example, like it could be friends, it could be church family, or other, again, people in the community that they're connected to in terms of that they're not thinking of would be what we're asking for. So I think it is the way that we talk to them, the way we engage them, the way that we think it's clear, like, oh, do you have anybody that you would want to be placed, that would be interested in placement, like that just is not necessarily something everyone is thinking about, or what does that even really mean? So I think the way we talk to them, the way we engage them, and also everybody in the family, of course, anybody that we do know about. I think other places to search are prior cases and referrals. There's sometimes lots of information in there that we don't know is there. And then also, you know, another, contacting Child Protective Services in other states. I think that's a challenging situation too, with people that are from out of state, in terms of, really reaching out and finding folks. But that's another way to see if we can find connections. And then other social media searches. That's another way we've in terms of like like internet, using the internet. And school contacts, emergency school contacts. Sometimes there will be, you know, folks identified there that we wouldn't, the parent or whoever maybe, or we're not, we don't have all that information. There might be information there. And also I just want to say about fathers, and also specifically like our African American families and our Native families, is really paying attention to, again, the engagement and using we have something called cultural brokers that we have developed, and using community and folks that are like father support or advocates, people that can better engage with individuals than maybe we can. A lot of times we have fathers who won't call us back, but we have a community partner who we call him and we ask him to call, and they'll call him back, and he helps us through that engagement. So it's maybe we can't engage, but others that have or like our tribal partners, are going to be more successful. So I think thinking in that way too.
Thank you. Well, I know we're out of time, unfortunately, because we can go on forever talking about this. This has been so interesting and really helpful. Thank you so much, Kevin, Judge Nash, and Adrian, for joining us today. And if you look in the chat, there's a couple of links to some other resources on this topic that might be helpful. And our next session is going to be on August 1st. And I'd like to thank Marina and the Child Welfare Playbook also for co-hosting this session with us. I hope everyone has a great day. And thank you again so much to our panelists. Really, really appreciate it. It's been a great session. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.